What if I told you that Gibbon wasn't just describing ancient history, but was laying out a blueprint for our own destruction? What if the very fabric of the American experiment is now yielding to that same inexorable pressure? This isn't just a history lesson. This is the darkest autopsy of a living patient. Within the next minutes, you will see the six-phase death spiral that has strangled every single superpower in history. And you will see, with terrifying clarity, that the United States is not just following the pattern, it is accelerating through it. Let's begin at the end, with the moment the lights go out. Imperial collapse doesn't start with a bang. It starts with a whisper, a slow, sickening realization that the rules have changed. It's not a battlefield defeat. It's the quiet, mundane horror of a currency becoming wallpaper. Close your eyes and imagine Caracas, Venezuela, just a few years ago. You are a middle-class professional. You've saved your entire life. You have a bank account with a balance that reads 10 million bolivars. A decade ago, that was a fortune. Today, it is not enough to buy a single loaf of bread. Your life's work, the numbers in your ledger, have been mathematically erased. You aren't poor because you were lazy. You are destitute because your rulers decided to print and print and print until the trust in your money evaporated into the digital ether. This is not a theoretical exercise. This is what Phase 6 looks like, and it is the inevitable destination of the path we are on. To understand how we got here, we must go back to the original blueprint, the first global superpower to walk this path, Rome. The parallels are not just striking, they are a perfect, horrifying mirror. Rome, at its peak, was the undisputed master of the known world. Its legions were invincible, its engineering unparalleled, and its currency, the denarius, was the global reserve currency, trusted from Britain to Egypt. It was the US dollar of the ancient world. And then they entered the spiral. Phase 1 is always military overextension. Rome didn't fall in a day. It bled out over centuries, stretched across thousands of miles of frontier. They had to garrison Britain, fight the Persians in the east, hold back Germanic tribes on the Danube, and patrol the North African coast. The cost was astronomical. By the 3rd century AD, the military consumed over 2/3 of the entire imperial treasury. The empire was so vast, it required not one, but 4 emperors just to administer it. This is the first crack in the foundation, the moment the cost of defending an empire becomes greater than the wealth the empire produces. Now look at the United States. We have over 750 military bases in 80 countries. We are pledged to defend nations across the globe through NATO and other alliances. Our military budget is larger than the next 10 nations combined. Yet our Navy is shrinking, our equipment is aging, and we are strategically stretched thinner than ever before. The crack is not just visible, it is widening. This leads directly to Phase 2, fiscal insanity and currency debasement. When you're stretched too thin, you have 2 choices: raise taxes from a shrinking productive economy or create new money. Rome, like every dying empire, chose the easy way. Emperor Nero in 64 AD began the Great Debasement. He shaved the edges off the silver denarius, mixing the precious metal with common copper. The coin looked the same, but it was a lie. This was the ancient equivalent of printing trillions of dollars out of thin air. The process accelerated over the next 2 centuries. By the time of Emperor Gallienus in 260 AD, the silver denarius was less than 5% silver. It was a copper coin with a silver wash. The result? Hyperinflation. A measure of wheat that cost 15 drachmas in 2nd century Egypt cost 120,000 drachmas by the late 3rd century. The life savings of the Roman middle class were utterly obliterated. The government had stolen their wealth not through confiscation, but through the printing press. Now, look at our own denarius. In 1971, Nixon severed the dollar's last link to gold. Since then, the US money supply, M2, has exploded by over 2,000%. We didn't mix copper with our silver. We created digital entries, conjuring trillions from nothing. The result is the same. The US dollar has lost over 98% of its purchasing power since the Federal Reserve's inception. We are living through a slow-motion version of the same monetary collapse that ravaged Rome. This brings us to phase 3, the debt spiral. This is the point of no return, where the empire becomes a slave to its own past decisions. The Spanish Empire is the textbook case. In the 16th century, Spain was drowning in silver from the New World. They were the wealthiest nation on earth, the undisputed superpower. But with all that money, King Philip II developed a fatal addiction: debt. He borrowed vast sums from German and Italian bankers to fund his endless wars against the Ottomans, the French, and the English. The interest payments were crushing. The story goes that when a fresh shipment of silver arrived from the Americas, the king's financiers would be waiting on the docks, not to celebrate, but to immediately seize the treasure to service old debts. The silver flowed through Spain, not into it. This led to the first of what would be 4 sovereign bankruptcies in 1557, 1560, 1575, and 1596. Each time they defaulted, wiped the slate clean, and then immediately started borrowing again. The empire was a zombie, shambling forward on financial life support, its real wealth siphoned away to foreign creditors. The parallel to modern America is a mathematical certainty. The U.S. national debt now exceeds $36 trillion. We are now spending over $1 trillion per year just on interest payments, more than we spend on our entire national defense. We are borrowing money to pay interest on money we've already borrowed. This is the definition of a terminal debt spiral. We are King Philip, watching the galleons come in, knowing they are already owned by someone else.
Phase 4 is the silent killer, the hollowing out and loss of productive capacity. This is where the empire loses its soul. It's the story of a people who forget how to build and only remember how to consume. Let's return to Spain during its so-called Golden Age. They had all the gold and silver in the world, and it made them lazy. Why bother building a workshop or farming efficiently when you can just buy anything you need from the Dutch or the Italians with your endless silver? Spanish nobility saw manual labor and commerce as beneath them. The result? Spanish agriculture stagnated, Spanish manufacturing withered. The Great Spanish Armada was built largely from imported timber and foreign expertise. The empire became a grotesque funnel. New World silver entered Spain and immediately flowed out to pay for goods produced by its rivals. When the silver mines eventually began to deplete, there was nothing left. The productive muscle of the nation had atrophied into nothing. Now, look at the United States. We are the world's greatest consumption engine, but our productive core has been gutted. We have traded our factories for supply chains that stretch to China. We import nearly everything, from our electronics to our pharmaceuticals, even the very flags we wave. Our trade deficit is a permanent, gaping wound. Just like Spain, we are a conduit. Dollars flow out to pay for goods, and the real productive capacity, the know-how, the factories, the jobs, is built elsewhere. We are living off the accumulated capital of our past, consuming our own seed corn. And this brings us to the present moment, the phase we are in right now, phase 5, internal decay and social fracture. This is not an economic metric, it is a psychological one. It is the loss of shared purpose, the erosion of trust, and the descent into tribalism. The historical case study is the Soviet Union in its final years. On the surface, it was still a superpower, a nuclear-armed giant with a massive military. But beneath the surface, the society was rotting. The people no longer believed in the communist project. A deep, pervasive cynicism set in. The joke among Soviets was, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. Corruption was endemic. Alcoholism was rampant. The birth rate plummeted. There was a collective sense that the system was illegitimate, that everyone was just going through the motions, waiting for the end. When the collapse came in 1991, there was no popular uprising to save the Union. There was just a resigned shrug. The society had already collapsed from within. The political dissolution was just a formality. Look around America today. Trust in every major institution, government, media, finance, is at a historic nadir. Our political discourse is not a debate, but a cold civil war. We are fracturing along every conceivable line. This is not a coincidence, it is a symptom. It is the societal manifestation of the economic and imperial decay from the previous phases. A society that is overextended, financially bankrupt, and unproductive cannot maintain social cohesion. The center cannot hold. This is where we stand today. We have navigated the first 5 phases of the collapse spiral with the grim efficiency of an empire reading from a pre-written suicide note. We are overextended like Rome, debasing our currency like Nero, drowning in debt like Imperial Spain, hollowed out like the Spanish Empire, and fracturing from within like the late Soviet Union. The pattern is not just clear, it is complete up to this point. The question is no longer if we are in the spiral, but what comes next. The final 2 phases, the loss of reserve currency status and the final sudden collapse, are waiting in the shadows. And the trigger for phase 6 is already being pulled, not in Washington, but in the financial centers of our rising rivals. Now, we will expose the final, terrifying stages of this spiral. We will reveal the secret meetings and the gold-backed currencies being built right now to dethrone the dollar. We will show you the 5 specific indicators that will flash red just before the final collapse. And more importantly, we will explore the historical escape hatches, what the few who saw the end coming in past empires did not just to survive, but to position themselves to thrive in the world that comes after. The final stage of the collapse spiral is not a slow decline, but a trapdoor that opens without warning. We have marched through the first 5 phases: overextension, debasement, debt, hollowing out, and social decay, with the grim inevitability of a Greek tragedy. But history screams a terrifying truth. The most brutal part of the collapse is always condensed into a breathtakingly short, violent finale. The Soviet Union, a superpower armed with 30,000 nuclear weapons, did not fade away over 50 years. It vaporized in 900 days. This is the nature of Phase 6, the loss of exorbitant privilege. This is the moment the world stops trusting your money. For America, it is the moment the dollar is dethroned. Do not imagine this as a slow, orderly transition. Imagine it as a bank run on an entire nation. For decades, the US dollar's reserve status has been our get-out-of-jail-free card. We could print money to pay our bills, and the world had to accept it because everyone needed dollars for trade. This exorbitant privilege allowed us to live beyond our means for generations. But that privilege is not a divine right. It is a perception, a collective delusion that can shatter in an instant. The blueprint for this was written by the British Empire. In 1914, the pound sterling was the undisputed king of currencies. But 2 world wars forced Britain to print endlessly to fund its survival, bankrupting the nation and draining its gold. The final, humiliating blow came in 1956 during the Suez Crisis. Britain, alongside France and Israel, invaded Egypt to seize the Suez Canal. In response, the United States, their supposed ally, flexed its financial muscle. President Eisenhower, fearing the conflict would push Egypt into Soviet hands, threatened to collapse the British pound. He instructed the U.S. Treasury to begin a massive sell-off of sterling bonds, a move that would have vaporized Britain's currency value overnight. The message was clear. The empire was no longer in charge of its own destiny. The British Prime Minister, Anthony Eden, received the news as a physical blow. He was told in no uncertain terms that the United States held the life of the British economy in its hands. Within days, Britain capitulated, ordering a ceasefire and withdrawing its forces in total humiliation. The sun had set. The world saw that Britain's power was an illusion, backed not by its own strength, but by American financial consent. The pound's reserve status crumbled, and with it, the last vestiges of the empire. This is not ancient history. The same forces are now aligning against the dollar. The foundation of our financial system is being chiseled away by our strategic rivals, and they are not being subtle about it. In boardrooms in Beijing and vaults in Moscow, a deliberate, calculated plan is underway to create a dollar alternative system. The BRICS coalition, once a laughingstock, is now a geopolitical monster, controlling a majority of global energy and key commodity production. Their mission is simple: to conduct trade in their own currencies, bypassing the dollar entirely. The petrodollar, the 50-year-old agreement that forced the entire world to buy oil in dollars, is dying. Saudi Arabia is now openly accepting yuan for oil. China is signing currency swap agreements with over a dozen nations. Russia and India settled their massive trade in rupees and yuan. Each of these deals is a brick being pulled from the dollar's foundation. The world's central banks are reading the writing on the wall. They are buying gold at a record pace, diversifying out of U.S. Treasury bonds. This is the quiet prelude to the bank run. When the tide turns, it will not be a trickle. It will be a tsunami of dollars rushing back to our shores, creating an inflationary firestorm that will make the 1970s look like a period of stability. The privilege that allowed us to print our way out of problems will become the weapon that destroys us.
This cascade leads directly to the final unforgiving stage, Phase 7, the sudden implosion. This is the collapse of the political and social order itself. Do not picture a revolution with barricades in the streets, at least not at first. Picture instead a systemic seizure, a financial heart attack. It begins with a liquidity crisis. The U.S. government, unable to find enough buyers for its trillions in new debt, is forced to offer catastrophic interest rates. This sends mortgage rates, car loan rates, and corporate borrowing costs into the stratosphere. The economy grinds to a halt overnight. Then, the government faces an impossible choice: default on its debt, triggering a global depression, or initiate the most extreme money-printing event in human history to monetize the debt, a maneuver known as modern monetary theory's final suicidal stage. They will choose to print. This will be the trigger for the hyperinflationary endgame. To understand what this feels like, we need only look to the Weimar Republic. We all know the black and white photos of Germans pushing wheelbarrows of cash to buy a loaf of bread. But the true horror was more intimate, more personal. It was the story of a man like you, a factory owner who in 1918 had set aside a massive cash reserve to fund his workers' pensions, a sum that could have supported them for a lifetime. By 1923, that same stack of currency was not enough to buy a single postage stamp. He had to look his loyal, aging employees in the eye and tell them that their security was gone, not through any fault of their own, but because the numbers on the page had become meaningless. It was the story of a middle-class housewife who had to burn her family's furniture to keep them warm because the money she got from selling her heirlooms was worthless by the time she walked to the coal merchant. Society didn't just get poorer, it was turned upside down. Debtors became kings, paying off mortgages with a single dollar. savers were liquidated, the social contract was torn up and burned for fuel. This is the true nature of Phase 7, the mathematical annihilation of trust and the moral order that holds a civilization together. For America, this implosion will be amplified by our own unique vulnerabilities. Our society is already fractured, armed, and digitally connected. The supply chains that bring food to our cities are stretched across oceans we may no longer control. A dollar crisis would not just mean high prices, it would mean empty shelves. The political legitimacy of a government that presided over the vaporization of its people's life savings would evaporate instantly. The chaos would not be a linear decline from New York to a small town in Iowa. It would be simultaneous, brutal, and absolute. The Roman Empire took centuries to disintegrate. The Soviet Union took 900 days. For a digital, just-in-time economy like ours, it could happen in 90. So, is there any escape? The black pill truth is that for the empire, there is none. The spiral is locked in. The pattern has repeated too many times to ignore. But for you, the individual, history offers a glimmer of light. In every collapse, there were those who saw the warning signs and positioned themselves not just to survive, but to build the foundations of the next world. The Medici bankers rose from the ashes of medieval financial crises. The American industrialists emerged from the panic of 1873. The tech giants were born in the stagflation of the 1970s. The key was not to save the dying system, but to transcend it. It was to hold real, non-sovereign assets, productive land, scarce resources, and most importantly, gold, the eternal asset that has outlived every fiat currency in history. It was to build skills that are valuable in any society, to foster a community of trust, and to mentally decouple from the narrative of the failing state. The goal is not to win a game that is rigged for collapse, but to step off the board entirely and start a new one. The six-phase collapse spiral is a tombstone for empires, but for the vigilant, it is also a map. It shows you the cliffs to avoid and the high ground to seek. The spiral is tightening, the final phases are upon us, and the choices you make now will determine whether you are a victim of the collapse or a founder of what comes after.